Come on.
Hello and welcome to the first official episode of the SoundHopping Podcast. It's great to have you here, and I'm going to get straight into it as per usual. First off, we're going to start with what I'm listening to at the minute.
What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Tell you what I'm listening to. Do.
As per usual, I've been listening to lots of different things recently, but with the release of their new album just last week, Eaten Alive, I've been listening to a lot of Sleaford Mods. They're a double act, essentially, a duo from up north, from Nottingham, I believe. That's where they're based anyway. And they have this, they're techno, but they got, electronic techno, but their lead singer has it's basically spoken word. It's very political, sort of punk in that aspect. If you took punk music and crossed it with a guy with a drum machine, it's a really unique sound. But I have to say it's not for everyone. But I've been listening to a lot of them recently, and when I first started listening to them, after seeing them briefly at Victorious Festival, I came to the conclusion that they're like Kasabian if Kasabian had, if Tom and Serge had grown up deprived of all knowledge of any melodies, which I know they're fans and they would absolutely hate. They've called Kasabian posing bastards on their first album, so there's clearly some animosity there. But it does sort of sound like, especially the first. Well, not the first album, but some of the songs on all of their albums sound like that they've sat down, they've had a meeting, and they've gone, you know what, we're pretty punk. We've got these lyrics, we're going to sing about what we know. Austerity era Britain, working class Britain. Lyrically, it's really brash. It's quite simple but vulgar in a really unapologetic way. But they're saying that there's something really poetic about it. It's quite oxymoronic in a way. It's this really harsh, vulgar language. Nothing too fancy about the actual words, but the political edge to it and the way it's delivered have this poetic feel to them. They've hit back at being labelled as the voice of the working people and for being political. In interviews, they've said that they're just sounding off about things that they experience and that they want to sort of get angry about and want to express to an audience. You've got to commend them on being honest. Everything they sing about is it's from the heart and it's from their own experience. Sadly, at that very meeting, they clearly had a vote and both vetoed the idea. The unnecessary ideas of both melody and that worn-out rag of musical structure, the chorus. Get rid of that, in the bin. They don't use choruses and don't really have too much melody to most of their songs. Sadly, this is probably what's kept them from being really popular. Not that their lyrics would help them go mainstream, because they do have that cutting British, politics edge to them. It's just an angry guy being angry about things he's experienced. You really listen to it for the lyricism, and that's provided by Jason Williamson. He's the vocalist, and he's got a real attack to his delivery. And unless you're really into the electro punk beats, which are produced by the the DJ, the beat producer, drum machine man Andrew Fern, I think it can really turn new fans away, especially live. There's no real music to mosh or dance to, and often there's no melody which is catchy enough to sing along or sort of stick around for. I remember when we caught them briefly at Victorious Festival down in Portsmouth, and I just remember me and my mate staring blankly at the stage whilst the singer raved on about life and austerity. With the hook of the song was "We're going down like BHS," which at the time we heard it was already a year or two old reference to then. It just dates it. The lyrics themselves are really symbolic, and they paint a really bleak atmosphere. We all just sort of gave each other sideways glances, and we were just wondering who was going to comment first about the man screaming about BHS on stage in the middle of the afternoon. They're really not a festival band in my opinion, but the music itself probably doesn't help. It's just a drum machine playing behind poetry, essentially, but poetry which is delivered in a really attacking way. And to be fair, the drum machine, some of their songs have got really great samples. Musically, it's quite impressive, but it does seem quite bare bones. It's just a drum machine and a guy rapping, I guess, but it's more like spoken word poetry. It does give it this hollow and confrontational blunt sound. On the other hand, the simplicity of it and the attack of the voice, it can be really intense and engaging. It's just the electro backing and the vocals, and live you can just see the attack and the strain that the singer Jason Williamson is putting on his voice. He's really speaking from the heart, and you can see that in a live performance, which would probably be a lot better to see at a smaller venue rather than a festival. The problem I've got with it's just hard not to want something more musical with the tracks. I personally like their 2015 track with the Prodigy. It's called Ibiza, and they've got some more musically rich songs on their first album. The first track on it's called R&B Pool, and it's got a sample of it samples a Deep Purple song, and it just has that. It's just more musically rich. There's more to the song rather than just having this drum beat and the vocals. There's one, I think it's actually called The Mekon, from the album The Mekon, and it's got a sample of Pretty Vacant by the Sex Pistols. This band, they're obviously heavily inspired by the punk movement, shown mostly through their cutting political lyrics. But it's a really good nod to the Sex Pistols, and they use that sample really, really well. The new album, Eaten Alive, it continues in the same vein really, except this time it seems a little less political, and it's got more of those great dark comedy moments they've got. They throughout their albums, they use a lot of dark humour and satire. It's always been part of their act. On this album specifically, they've got a line which says, Graham Coxon, referring to the guitarist from Blur, they say Graham Coxon looks like a left-wing Boris Johnson. It's got this really, there are some really, really funny moments to the album and to lots of their songs really, which is it's really interesting to listen to. It's something different. I think that's why I was listening to so much of it this week, including the new album. It's just something different to the more basic music nowadays. They've released 2 singles already from this album, one called Obesity and the other called Kebab Spider. I saw a journalist for The Guardian, and he said Obesity could be from The Cure or Depeche Mode, and to be honest, that's a joke. I have to be honest. It's nothing like The Cure or Depeche Mode. It's just not that musical. It is a drum beat and a man ranting. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's miles off from The Cure or Depeche Mode. I've got no idea what this journalist was thinking about, or what he was listening to really. But the song Obesity is a really great insight into Williamson's feelings of guilt, and his change as he now lives in a sort of middle class area of Nottingham, and he's reaped the rewards of his musical success, his career. Despite basing that career on writing lyrics about how he's working class and he's struggling through austerity Britain. There's that real sense of self-doubt and guilt about him making this personal success. On the album, there's one song which stands out, which I'd recommend listening to. It's called Big Bert. It weaves and dances between literalism and absurdist metaphors. It conjures damning criticism of the music industry and really inventive commentary about growing up on an estate in Lincolnshire. But really, I have to say it's quite admirable. They've got their message, they've got their style, their attitude, and they're not afraid to stick one up to the industry and society. You've got to hand it to them, really. They are a unique band doing what they do on their terms. Alright, let's take a look at the past now. Let's roll back the years. Okay, I'm going to do this in chronological order. I've got 3 points picked out today. Last week, in 1973, Pink Floyd released their seminal album, Dark Side of the Moon. It's considered a classic by critics, the public, almost anyone who's ever listened to it will tell you that it is a timeless, if you excuse the pun, timeless record. You just have to go listen to it if you haven't already. I'm sure most people who listen to this will have listened to it, or at least heard one of the songs like Money, Breathe, or or Time. It's just an amazing record. I listen to it probably once a week. Absolutely fantastic. Can't recommend it enough, as it has been recommended throughout the last 3-4 decades. Jumping ahead to 1984, last week it was the week that Michael Jackson won 8 Grammys in one day. That's the joint record for the most Grammys earned at one show. And interestingly, it's the exact same week that Thriller went to number 1, and it stayed there. This is shocking. It stayed there for 34 weeks at number 1. I'm personally not a massive Michael Jackson fan. Not necessarily to do with his music. I can appreciate him for performing and writing some of the greatest pop songs, definitely of the last 50 years. But yeah, that is an impressive feat. One single staying at number 1 for 34 weeks. That's unreal. And jumping up to more modern times, in 2007, this is quite selfish of me. This album, it reminds me of my childhood a little bit. I remember these songs being on the radio all the time, and my mum had this album for sure. I know it was playing in the house a lot because I can remember it. I can remember the cover of it, around the house on the CD stacks. And that's Duffy's album, Rock Ferry. Yeah, released in 2007, last week. And it won the Best Pop Vocal Album at the Grammys that year. But yeah, it's a great album, deserving of the Grammy, definitely. Okay, we've taken a look at the past. Let's skip it ahead to the future now.
You've got to come back with me. Back to the future. Future.
Okay, coming up in the next week or so, Sigrid, who is the Norwegian female pop singer, and I don't know if I should be embarrassed. No, you shouldn't be embarrassed to admit if you like something. I'm going to do a podcast on that soon, actually, about guilty pleasures and what a load of rubbish that is. But Sigrid, for me, is probably one of my favourite pop artists of the last few years. I don't listen to a lot of pop and not really a lot of modern music, but hearing Sigrid songs either on the radio or on adverts, seeing her perform live on TV shows, I just think they're some of the most catchy, uplifting, really entertaining pop songs of the last few years. And the new album is being released on the 8th. She won the BBC Sound 2018 last year. The album's got two of my favourite songs from two of my favourite pop songs from the last year or so. And that's Psycho Punch, which is what the album's called, and Strangers. I think Strangers is absolutely unbelievable. It's just a really, really great, uplifting, bouncy pop song, and and it looks like it captivates audiences live as well, which really helps. She's one of the female solo pop artists at the minute, probably the only female solo pop artist who's who I actually listened to a little bit and have actually enjoyed recently. Of course, Foals are releasing the first part of that album. They're splitting it into 2 parts. That's being released on the 8th of March as well, alongside Sigrid's album. It's called Everything Not Saved Will Be Lost. I don't know why they've separated the album into 2 parts. I know the second part is being released in autumn. It'll be really interesting, especially for me. I have to say don't particularly, I didn't particularly get into Foals when they first sort of getting really big on the indie scene. Wasn't too bothered about seeing them when they were on tour. The only song I really knew about was Mountain at My Gate, I think it's called. But I'm really interested to see how this album plays out. I wonder if it's a bit more of a concept album, if it's split into two parts. But yeah, I'm really interested to take a look at this and sort of have another go at listening to Foals. And finally, the British hip-hop and grime artist Dave, he's releasing an album next week called Psychodrama. And speaking of drama, there's been plenty of it surrounding the new single from Dave. It's called Black. Realistically, I can't see what the drama's about. It's a song about black empowerment and inequality, which Dave's experienced. He talks about, raps about on this song, about how he's had to work, twice as hard as some people, because of prejudice or inequality in society. A lot of people have got an uproar about it because Radio 1 are playing it, and people are saying, if the song was called White and done by a white artist, would you even air the song? But I can't see the big issue about it. It's it's an empowering song. It was released and it's meant in a really positive way. And I'm not a massive grime fan really, but I'll definitely give it a listen next week when it's released. Okay, and let's take a look at my track of the week.
Track of the week.
My track of the week this week goes to the immortal Johnny Marr. He's released a song called Armatopia, and I first saw it on YouTube because it's got a really, really amazing music video, and it's got a lot of meaning behind the song. When I'm listening to it, it's got a really catchy chorus, which helps. It just helps a song where you could listen to it without having to listen out to the lyrics, particularly, or having to think about it on a deeper level. First of all, it is a really, really easy song to listen to. It's got a great catchy chorus, really good instrumentation, and Johnny Marr singing on it. For someone who was a guitarist in the Smiths for so long, Johnny Marr's got a great voice. I personally enjoy listening to it. I enjoyed his last album, which he released last year. I don't think the song's on the album because it's a bit more spontaneous. I think it's listening to the lyrics, it sounds like it's largely based on divisions in society at the minute, probably a bit influenced by Brexit, and especially influenced about the issue of climate change. Just a lot. It sort of encapsulates a feeling of a split society, but then, as the music video suggests, it's got a real feeling of groups of people needing to unite for certain causes, whether that be climate change or Brexit or anything that's happening in politics at the minute. It's got a really uplifting feel, whilst it acknowledges these issues, and the music video really helps that. It shows a lot of, I guess they're depicted as outcasts. They're young people who are in tower blocks. They're dressed in really interesting, unique ways. Like patches on their jackets. There's a transsexual person in it. There's, they're just people who are, I guess, often pushed to the outskirts of society or have been, affected by prejudice in some way, and they all unite together, and the video follows them going to like this club where Johnny Marr's singing, and there are people dancing in there, and they're all having a really good time, and it's a real feel good video, and the song itself has quite a feel good feeling, especially the chorus. So yeah, definitely go listen to it. It's called Armatopia by Johnny Marr. And for the first time you listen to it, I highly recommend going on YouTube and listening to it with that music video. But yeah, it's really great. Unexpected. Wasn't expecting Johnny Marr to release a single or release any song at all after releasing an album, so soon after the album last year. But it's great. Go and listen to it. I can't recommend it enough.
Let me tell you, oh, I've got news for you.
In the news this week, Victoria's Festival completed its lineup, adding New Order to its Sunday headliner. New Order joins the Specials, Rudimental and Two Door Cinema Club as some of the headliners headlining the festival this year. And finally, some sad news. The Prodigy singer Keith Flint has died aged 49. He was found dead at his home in Essex yesterday. After his passing, many artists have been on social media singing his praises and paying their respects to the artist, who was a real pioneer in the British rave scene during the 90s. It's believed he committed suicide, and the band released a statement after the announcement of his death, calling him a true pioneer, innovator and legend.
Oh, I've got news for you.
What am I gonna do?
Okay, and thank you very, very, very much for listening to the first official episode of SoundHopping Podcast. Feel free to subscribe, please do. Follow me on Instagram. There's a link on the YouTube channel itself. If you want any queries, any questions, send it to that Instagram or the email soundhopping@gmail.com. I can't thank you enough for listening to this, so thank you again, and hopefully I'll see you next week. I've been Ben Conway, this has been the SoundHopping Podcast, and I'm hopping off your airwaves now. See you later.
Thank you for listening.